Okay, so this street is called La Calle Union. This was just a normal street that was part of the city of Jerez. The cellar here we're going to go into just now was the first cellar that the founder ever built, La Constancia. So when he built the cellar on this side, he spoke to the council to see if there was any way he could have direct access between his two cellars. Okay, so as you can see, they closed off the whole street. Everything going down and off to your right was public highway, which got completely closed off for his private use. Okay, so it just shows you the power that they have in the city. Jerez was built on the sherry houses. It's where all the wealth came from. And even though today it's a lot less, they're still very important within the city. And González Byass, the González family still actually live here. So they're still very well looked upon within the city. Okay, so this is what I was saying before, people have these pergolas in their garden for shade. So summertime is the best place to come. Okay, so this is La Constancia. This is the first cellar that the founder built. So he started to build in about 1853. So previously he just hired in the region. For him, this was a whole new experience, building up a winery, so he wasn't too sure how it would go. So previously he would just hire, and when he's seen things going well, he started to build his own cellar, very little by little. Now Constancia just means consistency or constancy. It's what he looked for in both his private and his working life, okay, which is why he named his first cellar La Constancia. So traditionally we had Tío Pepe in this cellar, but 6 years ago was the 175th anniversary of the company. So we wanted something really special. I told you before we have really rich historic archives, so we wanted to show these to the public. So we emptied this cellar, we set up an exhibition which told 175 years history of the company, and well, unfortunately it's been taken down, and nowadays this cellar was used for weddings, flamenco, zambombas, art galleries, all sorts of things. In these casts around the side, we have some of our oldest olorosos. Okay, so this is a continuation of La Constancia. So these are some of the oldest soleras that we have in González Byass. Now it's very important that the temperature within the cellar is quite steady, especially for the Finos. So it should always be between 18 and 24, 26 maximum. Okay, so as you see, we don't have any air conditioning units. We're still using the traditional methods, which are a few different things. For example, you can see that all of the casks are on the sand, which is called albero, which is the same as used in the bull ring. So on very hot days, this gets watered. Okay, so it brings the temperature down and the humidity up within the cellar. Also, the cellars have very big high ceilings. You know, they're called the cathedrals of Jerez. So this structure is really useful because it has good ventilation and it traps all the hot air at the top of the ceiling. And the most important thing for the construction of the cellars is their orientation to the wind. So you know, in this part of Spain, because we're right on the point of Europe, we have two wind influences. So we have the hot wind, the Levante, which comes from the Mediterranean, and we have the cold Poniente, which comes from the Atlantic Ocean. So when these cellars were built 150 years ago, they were all built facing the Poniente, so that you have that nice, cool wind influence coming in to the cellar to keep the temperature down. Okay? All we have added over the years is these fans, which are temperature controlled. So if the temperature outside is cooler than inside, they click on and it brings the nice cold air into the cellar. Okay. Now the structures are so well designed, if you like, and so well adapted to the temperature that we have here, that it's very, very rarely that you would ever lose a cask because of differences in temperature. Okay. Our winemaker Antonio knows the best corners of the cellar with the most steady temperatures and the best humidity, which is where he would have our Tío Pepe casks. Okay, so we have over 22,000 casks for Tío Pepe, but we have them in 20 different areas of the cellar, depending on the temperatures and the humidities. Okay, so when we do an extraction, when we do a saca, we have to take a percentage from every different solera, bring them together, blend them, and then bottle. Okay, because if we just take from one, it's going to be different from if we just take from there. So we always have to take from them all, blend together, and then we can have the bottling of Tío Pepe. Okay. So here you can see one of our casks of Tío Pepe. Okay, so this is just a normal Fino cask, but we've put a glass front so that you can see inside. So this is, we have our Fino and we have our floor. Okay. So as you know in Jerez, and you will see in the tasting, we have Jerez. One of the great things about Jerez is the variety of wines. So you have all the way from the driest right through to the sweetest. You have palo cortado, amontillado, etc., etc. But as you know, there's basically two main groups of wines in Jerez, and each group has its own type of aging. So we have the Finos, which have the biological aging under floor, and we have the Olorosos, which have the oxidative aging. Now in the case of the Finos, you have to go all the way back to the classification stage. So we have our harvest in mid-August. The majority of our fermentation nowadays takes place in stainless steel tanks. This usually takes about 2 weeks. And then we leave the wine in the tank until they see the first colds come to Jerez. So this is usually the end of November, beginning of December, when the temperature drops in Jerez. So when the temperature drops, all of those solid particles that have been produced during fermentation contract naturally, and they all decant to the bottom of the deposit. At this time, we take off the clean wine at the top, and we have the classification of the wine. Okay, now this is now young wine. It's about 11.5, 12% alcohol, but we still call it must. Okay, because for us, it's not a wine yet because it's not been in cask. So this is where the winemaker has to decide whether this must is best for Fino or Oloroso. Okay. Now it's pretty much something we already know because I told you before that we have different presses depending on what type of wine we're making. But obviously a lot can happen during fermentation, so we have to double check. So in the case of the Fino, we're looking for a young wine, which as its name suggests is something very fine, very elegant, very delicate. In this case we fortify to 15.3% alcohol, goes into the top row, and starts to move through the Solera system. Now in Jerez, with the atmosphere that we have, with the temperature we have, and with this 15.3% alcohol, is the perfect environment for this yeast to form naturally on top of the wine. Okay, so this is nothing more than millions and millions and millions of colonies of yeast, which form on top of the wine. They kind of stick together, if you like, and to form this thick blanket, which we call la flor. Okay, so if you look, you can see it completely covers the surface of the wine. Now this is why we only fill to 500 litres, because we have to leave space for the yeast to grow, and also we have to leave this space full of oxygen. Okay, because the yeast is a living organism, it has to breathe. So we need to leave this oxygen so that the yeast can breathe. Now the flor is the most important part in the aging of the Finos, because it affects in the three parts of the tasting. Firstly, in the colour. The wine, during its whole time in cask, it spends 4 years in cask, is completely protected by this layer of yeast, so has no oxidization whatsoever. So this is why it's able to maintain that really pale, really yellow-like colour, because it has never been in contact with oxygen. The second influence is on the nose. When you taste a Fino, when you taste a Tío Pepe, on the nose, it smells like yeast, it smells like bread, it smells like bakery. That's because it's been spent its whole time under this yeast. And you find in Finos it has this really interesting, indescribable kind of incisive, penetrating note in the nose. That's from the yeast as well, because that's from the acetaldehyde. One of the main jobs of the yeast is to convert alcohol to acetaldehyde. And that acetaldehyde is what gives that really interesting note, so characteristic to Finos. The third influence is on the mouth. You'll find that Fino is one of the driest wines. It's completely bone dry. We have no sugar because we ferment to 0. But also because of the yeast, we have no glycerin. Okay, so you know glycerin or glycerol would usually give a slight sweet sensation to the wine. However, this has been completely consumed by the yeast. We have to remember that the yeast is a living organism, so it needs oxygen to survive, but it also has to eat, it has to consume all the nutrients that we have within the wine. One of its main nutrients is going to be the glycerin. Now usually this would start off at about 6 grams per litre of glycerin in the wine, but after 4 years under the yeast, has been completely consumed down to less than 1 gram per litre. Okay, so the finished product, Tío Pepe, has no sugar and no glycerin, and that's why it's completely bone dry on the mouth. Okay, so that's why the flor is so important within the aging of the Finos, and it's really interesting because the whole life cycle of the yeast takes place within the cask. Okay, so you have your yeast cells in suspension within the wine. They grab onto oxygen bubbles and they float to the surface, and they start to reproduce till you form this thick, compact flor. Now obviously some of those yeast cells come to the end of their life, so they will start to die off. So when they die, they come down to the bottom to form what we call los piques, or la madre. Okay, so these are dead yeast cells, which have come to the bottom of the cask, which at the same time have a type of autolysis. So they start to decompose. They give nutrients back into the wine, which give fresh food, if you like, to this young yeast at the top. Okay, so you have the young yeast consuming, dies off, gives nutrients back into the wine, which feed this young yeast at the top. So you have the whole cycle taking place. So that's in the case of the phenos. So we call this biological aging because it's under the floor. You need to go all the way back to the classification stage. At this point, you find a must which has more character, more structure, more body, so it's better suited to an oloroso. In our case, in González Byass, we fortify to 18%, goes into the top row, and starts to move through the Solera system. Now, this yeast is really sensitive to temperature, which we said earlier, but also to alcohol. It has a limit of 16% alcohol. So in the case of the oloroso, if we're fortifying to 18%, we're completely killing off the yeast. It can't survive. Okay? So we still only fill to 500 litres. We have no yeast, and we have complete contact with the oxygen. We leave this space so that we have a larger surface area in contact with oxygen and a deeper oxidization of the wine. Okay, so you can see in olorosos completely changes the wine. For example, the colour, they're completely oxidized. So you now have this dark amber mahogany colour. On the nose, you get no reminders of the yeast. This hasn't had flour, so you get no bread, you get no bakery. You don't get that incisive note on the nose. What dominates on the nose is the Palomino variety, so it's hazelnuts, almonds. And thirdly, on the mouth. Dry olorosos are completely dry. They have to have less than 5 grams per litre of sugar, but you'll find that they have that glycerin, which the Fino doesn't have. So for example, they're completely dry. However, especially in the finish, you get a kind of silky, sweet sensation, and this is due to the glycerin. Okay, because in the case of the Fino, we said that the yeast consumes the glycerin. Obviously, in olorosos, if you have no yeast, no consumption of glycerin, and at the same time concentration. So for example, in our young oloroso, you'll find it maybe has 7 grams per litre of glycerin, whereas the Fino had 1. Okay, so you really see that difference on the mouth. Okay, so obviously we have a big selection of wines in between, which you'll see in a tasting, but these are the two main groups. Finos, under floor, and olorosos, completely oxidized. Okay?